You saved my tribe. Now I give you my daughter as a wife," spoke the Apache elder. The sun was beginning to dip behind the dusty hills, casting long shadows across the small frontier town. The streets were quiet except for the occasional clatter of wagon wheels over uneven stones and the distant lowing of cows. The town itself was simple, almost forgotten by time. A handful of wooden buildings lined the main road, a general store with a swinging door, a small saloon with the faint smell of whiskey and dust, and a tiny train station at the edge of town. Smoke curled lazily from the chimneys of cabins, and the wind carried the scent of dry earth and wildflowers. At the train station, a young woman stood near the edge of the platform, her eyes shifting nervously from one side to the other. She was small but strong, with dark hair braided neatly down her back and eyes that seemed to hold both determination and worry. Her name was Elena. She clutched a small bundle of belongings wrapped in a faded cloth, holding it close to her chest as if it were a shield against the world. The sun caught the silver pendant around her neck, a keepsake from her family, and it glimmered briefly before being hidden again under her scarf. Elena had been traveling alone for most of the day, and the journey had been long and exhausting. Her destination was a neighboring town where a relative had promised her shelter and safety, but reaching it alone was proving harder than she had expected. The train was the fastest way to get there, yet standing on the platform, she felt exposed. The passengers who arrived seemed curious, their eyes flicking toward her with questions unasked, judgments unspoken. Some looked at her with mild suspicion, others with indifference, and a few with faint curiosity that made her cheeks burn. She was a stranger in this town, a woman traveling alone, and that alone made her vulnerable. She took a deep breath and tried to steady herself. She reminded herself that she could do this, that she had done difficult things before, but her confidence faltered when she saw the ticket agent behind the counter. He was a man in his 40s, with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to measure everything carefully. Elena hesitated at the edge of the counter, unsure if she should step forward. She had prepared herself to answer his questions, to show her ticket and explain her journey, but the words seemed to stick in her throat. The small crowd of passengers waiting behind her added to her anxiety, making her feel exposed and alone. It was at that moment that he appeared. A cowboy, tall and broad-shouldered, with a worn hat that shaded his face and boots that had clearly seen many trails. His presence was calm but commanding, as though the world around him slowed slightly in acknowledgement of his arrival. He adjusted the strap of his saddlebag and took a few steps toward the station platform. Elena noticed him immediately, partly because of the way he moved with quiet confidence, partly because she felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps he could help her. She didn't know how or why, but something about him seemed trustworthy, like someone who understood the challenges of traveling alone. Elena's heart pounded. She had considered asking for help before, but she had never gone this far. The fear of rejection, of being ignored or laughed at, had always held her back. Yet now, with the train soon to depart and the eyes of strangers on her, she knew she had no choice. She took a step toward the cowboy, her hands shaking slightly as she clutched her bundle tighter. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need your help, please." The cowboy looked down at her, his face calm and curious. "What kind of help?" he asked, his voice deep but gentle. Elena hesitated, unsure how to explain. She could feel her cheeks warming, her stomach twisting with nerves. Finally, she blurted out the words that had been building inside her all afternoon. "Please, pretend to be my husband," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Just in front of the passengers for the journey." The cowboy blinked, clearly taken aback. He wasn't sure he had heard her correctly. He glanced around at the few travelers nearby, then back at her. Her eyes were earnest, wide, and pleading, and for a moment he saw the fear and desperation that lay beneath her request. He could sense the seriousness in her tone, the vulnerability in her posture. This was not a joke or a test. She truly needed his help. "Your husband?" he asked slowly, trying to understand. "Yes," Elena said, nodding quickly. "Just pretend. I'm traveling alone and I don't want people to judge me or think I'm unsafe. I can't do this alone." The cowboy studied her for a long moment. He noticed the way she held herself, the small tremor in her hands, the flicker of worry in her eyes. He realized that this was about more than appearances. She was asking for protection, for safety, for someone to stand by her when the world might not be kind. He felt a mix of surprise, curiosity, and a growing sense of responsibility. "All right," he said finally, his voice steady. "Now it is. I'll help you, but we need to understand each other first. Bala, this pretending, it's only for the journey, yes? No misunderstandings." Elena's eyes brightened with relief. She nodded vigorously. "Yes, only for the journey, nothing more. I promise. I need to feel safe." "Very well. Then we'll do it together. I'll be your husband for as long as you need." Elena felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She had not expected someone to agree so easily, but the cowboy's calm demeanor made her feel as though she could finally breathe. The fear that had been twisting inside her for hours began to ease, replaced by a fragile sense of security. As they approached the ticket counter together, the cowboy took a subtle step closer to her, signaling to anyone who might be watching that they were traveling as a couple. Elena held her head a little higher, drawing strength from his presence. The ticket agent glanced at them, eyebrows slightly raised, but said nothing. Perhaps he sensed the seriousness of their arrangement, or perhaps he simply didn't care. Either way, Elena felt a small victory. She was no longer entirely alone. With tickets in hand, they moved toward the train. The air was filled with the sound of whistles and the clatter of wheels against the tracks. Other passengers jostled for position, some curious, some impatient. Elena could feel her heart racing again, but this time it was mixed with anticipation rather than fear. She glanced at the cowboy, who gave her a reassuring nod. Together they stepped onto the train platform, blending into the crowd, yet standing out as a pair. As they found seats near a window, Elena felt a quiet sense of relief. She was no longer just a young woman traveling alone. She was part of a team, however temporary that might be. The cowboy settled beside her, keeping a respectful distance but close enough to provide reassurance. She could feel his steady presence, like an anchor in a turbulent world. The train began to move, slowly at first, then picking up speed as it left the town behind. Dust rose from the tracks, swirling around the wheels and settling on the benches. Elena watched the landscape change outside the window. Rolling hills, fields dotted with wildflowers, and distant mountains that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. She felt a mixture of awe and wonder, but also a lingering worry. The journey was far from over, and she knew that challenges might still arise. Yet for the first time in hours, perhaps even days, she felt a glimmer of hope. She had asked for help, and someone had given it without hesitation. She had trusted a stranger, and he had chosen to stand by her. That small act of kindness, simple as it seemed, filled her with a warmth she had not felt in a long time. The cowboy glanced at her briefly, then returned his gaze to the passing scenery. Elena noticed the way he seemed alert, aware of everything around them, as if ready to protect her from any threat. She felt a quiet sense of gratitude and respect growing within her. They were strangers, yet somehow, in this brief moment, they were allies. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The train rattled over the tracks, carrying them forward into the unknown. Elena leaned slightly against the window, feeling a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. The journey had begun, and though she still feared what lay ahead, she also knew that she was not facing it alone. For the first time that day, Elena allowed herself a small, hopeful smile. Perhaps, just perhaps, this journey would not be as frightening as she had imagined. Perhaps she had found not only protection, but also a quiet friendship in the most unexpected of places. A rugged cowboy willing to pretend to be her husband for the sake of her safety. And with that thought, she settled into her seat, ready to face whatever the road ahead might bring. The train rattled steadily along the tracks, carrying passengers through the endless stretches of plains and rolling hills. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels against the rails was almost hypnotic, a constant reminder of movement, progress, and the journey ahead. Inside the small carriage, Elena sat close to the window, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her bundle resting against her knees. Beside her, the cowboy, whose name she had learned was Jack, maintained a quiet presence, watching the other passengers with calm attention, while allowing her the space she clearly needed. For the first few moments, Elena had been tense, worried that their act of pretending to be married would feel awkward or forced. But Jack's natural ease had put her at some measure of comfort. He didn't overstep, didn't speak unnecessarily, yet she felt a protective reassurance simply from his being there. The air between them was gentle, almost peaceful, even amidst the occasional murmurs and shifting of passengers in the carriage. Elena took a deep breath and decided it was time to explain why she had made such an unusual request. "Jack," she began, her voice soft, "I should probably tell you why I ask you to pretend to be my husband. It's not an easy thing for me to do, asking strangers for help." Jack glanced at her, his brown eyes steady and patient. "I'm listening," he said. There was no judgment in his tone, only quiet attentiveness. She nodded and shifted slightly, keeping her voice low so that only he could hear. Traveling alone is dangerous sometimes. People look at a woman by herself and assume things. They think she's weak or that she can't protect herself. I've been alone on the trail before, and it's frightening. I thought maybe if I had someone by my side, even just in appearance, it would make it easier. For people to respect me, to leave me alone. Jack nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. "So it's not just about appearances," he said. "It's about safety."
"Yes," she whispered.
"Exactly." Her voice trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. She had learned long ago that showing fear could make others see her as vulnerable, and she hated the idea of being seen that way. Yet with Jack, she felt strangely safe. She didn't have to hide everything. Jack leaned back in his seat, resting one arm casually along the back. "I understand," he said simply. "And I'll help. That's what I'm here for." Elena's shoulders relaxed a little, and she allowed herself a small smile. She had expected hesitation, maybe even refusal, but Jack's calm acceptance eased her nerves more than she could have imagined. She realized that this was not just a practical solution, it was a human connection, an unspoken promise of support at a moment when she had felt vulnerable and alone. As the train continued, other passengers occasionally glanced their way. A few looked approving, some curious, and others barely noticed. Elena noticed the small difference that Jack's presence made. When a man who looked like he might have tried to be rude walked past, Jack subtly positioned himself so that Elena was shielded. The man's glance flickered uncertainly, and he moved along without comment. Elena felt a quiet relief. It was not just pretense. It worked. Hours passed, and the landscape outside the window changed subtly. The golden fields shifted into patches of forest, and distant hills rose against the horizon. The sunlight softened, casting long, warm beams through the carriage windows. Elena felt a gentle weariness settle over her, the kind that comes after a long day of travel and stress. She had not realized how tense she had been until now, and she allowed herself to lean slightly back in her seat, trusting that Jack would watch over her as needed. Jack noticed her relaxation and offered a small smile, but he didn't speak immediately. He seemed content to allow the quiet of the carriage to settle around them. Finally, after a moment, he said, "You've been traveling for quite some time alone, haven't you?" Elena nodded, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "Yes, most of my life, actually. I've traveled between villages, through forests and plains. I've had to be careful, and sometimes it's lonely. But I've learned a lot about myself along the way." Jack's expression softened. "I can see that." "Ah! You're brave to travel alone, especially in times like these." A warmth rose in Elena's chest at his words. Compliments had always felt strange to her, but this felt genuine, without any hidden meaning or expectation. "Thank you," she said simply. For a while, silence fell again, but it was comfortable this time, not tense. Occasionally, the train would sway slightly, and Elena would glance out the window at the passing scenery. She thought about the towns she had left behind, and the ones ahead, about the journey she had already endured, and the ones still to come. It was not just a physical journey, it was emotional as well. Traveling alone as a young woman meant constant vigilance, but with Jack beside her, even in pretense, the weight felt lighter. The conversation started to flow slowly. Jack asked about her life, her family, and her home. Elena answered cautiously at first, revealing little but enough to keep the discussion natural. She told him about the village she had grown up in, nestled among the rolling hills and surrounded by wildflowers, about the small cabin where her family had lived, and about the fields they had tended together. Jack listened intently, asking questions here and there, never prying too much, and always letting her share in her own time. "I've never seen a woman travel so far by herself," he said quietly after a pause. "Most people would consider it impossible, or at least dangerous." Elena shrugged slightly, smiling wryly. "Danger is something you get used to," she said. "I've had to learn quickly, and sometimes you just have to trust yourself. Even when it feels impossible, you keep going." Jack nodded, impressed by her calm bravery. "I admire that. It takes courage to face the world alone and keep moving forward." Their conversation was interrupted briefly by the train conductor, who walked through the car collecting tickets and checking on passengers. Jack handed theirs over, and the conductor gave a small nod, moving on without further comment. It was a minor interruption, but it reminded Elena of the boundaries she had to maintain. She was pretending to be married, and every small detail mattered. The reality of the act pressed lightly on her shoulders, but she found comfort in Jack's quiet support. As the sun continued to sink, the carriage grew warmer, the air thick with the smell of dust, wool, and the faint tang of the metal rails. Elena felt her eyes grow heavy, but she resisted sleeping fully, wanting to remain alert. Jack noticed her weariness and leaned slightly toward her, speaking in a low, gentle voice. "You should rest if you need to," he said. "I'll make sure no one bothers you." Her eyes met his, surprise and gratitude mingling there. "Thank you," she whispered. That means a lot to me." "You're welcome," he replied simply, and for a moment no more words were needed. Night began to fall outside the train windows, painting the world in shades of deep blue and silver. The stars were starting to appear, faint pinpricks of light against the dark sky. Elena allowed herself to relax more, leaning slightly against the window, and then against Jack's shoulder when he offered the space. It was a small, simple gesture, but it carried weight. For the first time in a long while, she felt a measure of safety and comfort in the presence of another person. The carriage continued to move steadily, the train cutting through the quiet night. Other passengers began to settle in, speaking in hushed tones or falling asleep. Elena and Jack remained quietly seated, sharing the silence without the need for constant conversation. In this shared quiet, an unspoken understanding grew between them. They were partners for the journey, companions in an unfamiliar world, and in that role, they found a quiet strength neither had expected. Hours passed like this, the night deepening, the train cutting steadily across the landscape. Elena thought about the journey ahead, the challenges she might still face, and the unexpected bond she had formed with Jack. She realized that while the act of pretending had brought them together, it was not just pretense anymore. It was a fragile, growing connection built on trust, respect, and shared experience. As the train continued through the darkness, Elena finally allowed herself to close her eyes fully, leaning gently against the steady presence of the cowboy at her side. She felt a quiet peace, knowing that whatever lay ahead, she would not face it alone. And with that thought, she drifted into a light, cautious sleep, the rhythmic clatter of the train lulling her into dreams filled with hope and resilience. The sun had fully set hours ago, and the train rolled steadily through the darkness. Inside the carriage, the dim light of a single lantern cast soft shadows on the faces of the passengers. Most were dozing quietly or murmuring in low voices, but Elena remained alert. Her eyes flicked occasionally to the window, watching the black shapes of trees and hills blur past. The rhythmic sound of the train's wheels against the rails was both calming and tense. It reminded her that she was moving forward, yet every mile brought new unknowns. Jack sat beside her, his posture relaxed, yet alert. Though he remained quiet most of the time, Elena could sense his careful watch over their surroundings. It was comforting, though it also reminded her of why she had asked for his help. She had seen the way people looked at her earlier in the day, some curious, some judgmental, and a few openly suspicious. Traveling alone was not safe for a woman, and in those moments, she understood the importance of having someone, even if only pretending to be her husband, at her side. The tension in the carriage began to rise when a group of passengers started to whisper among themselves. Elena could hear fragments of their conversation as they glanced toward her and Jack.
"Who is that girl traveling alone?" one voice said.
"And that man with her? Are they married?" Elena's heart sank. She felt exposed again, like all the comfort she had felt was slipping away. She could hear the suspicion in their voices, the judgment that often followed a young woman traveling by herself. She glanced at Jack, who gave her a reassuring nod. His calm presence reminded her to stay steady, to keep her composure even when others tried to unsettle her. One of the passengers, a man with a rough-looking face and a harsh tone, stood and approached them. "Excuse me," he said, his eyes narrowing. "I couldn't help but notice. Are you two together? Are you married?" Elena's hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to speak clearly. "Yes," she said softly. her voice steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. "We are traveling together as husband and wife."
The man grunted and glanced around, as if expecting someone else to confirm.
When no one intervened, he muttered something under his breath and walked away. Elena exhaled slowly, feeling both relief and unease. Even pretending, she realized, could be complicated. People were quick to judge, and any small misstep could draw unwanted attention. Jack leaned slightly toward her and whispered, "Don't worry, I've got your back. Just stay calm, and we'll handle this together." Elena nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't just relief she felt. It was a growing sense of trust. Jack was not just a stranger pretending for the sake of appearances. He was genuinely watching over her, ready to intervene if needed. That reassurance gave her courage she hadn't felt in a long time. The hours passed slowly. The train rattled over tracks that twisted and turned through forests and valleys. The occasional whistle from the locomotive echoed in the night, blending with the soft murmur of other passengers. Elena and Jack spoke little, conserving energy and keeping their roles consistent. But even in the quiet tension built, they could sense the eyes of curious travelers following them, wondering if their act was genuine or a deception. The real test came when a young boy, no older than 10, accidentally dropped a small toy near Elena's feet. As he bent down to retrieve it, his mother scolded him sharply, drawing the attention of several nearby passengers. In the sudden hush, a man at the end of the carriage made a snide comment about girls pretending to be married. Elena's face burned with shame and anger. She wanted to respond, to defend herself, but Jack gently placed a hand on her arm. "Let me handle this," he whispered. Before she could protest, Jack stood slowly, his movements calm but deliberate.
"Oh, well?"
He approached the man with an easy confidence, his voice quiet but firm. "I assure you, ma'am, we are traveling together as husband and wife. There's no need for comments or judgment." The man hesitated, clearly taken aback by Jack's calm authority. No one spoke, and the carriage held a tense silence. Then the man muttered something under his breath and returned to his seat, leaving Elena and Jack alone again. Elena felt a surge of gratitude. Her heart pounded not just from fear, but from the realization that Jack's presence, both protective and composed, made a tangible difference. She had never experienced someone stepping in so quietly, so effectively, without making her feel embarrassed or indebted. As the train continued, Elena began to relax slightly, though the tension lingered like a shadow at the edge of her mind. She and Jack shared small moments of conversation now, speaking softly about harmless topics, the landscapes passing outside, the towns they had traveled through, and memories of simpler days in their childhood homes. Elena found herself laughing quietly at one of Jack's lighthearted comments about the unpredictable nature of cattle drives. It was strange to feel joy in such a tense situation, but the laughter helped to break the tension that had built inside her. Despite these lighter moments, the night carried challenges. The train slowed unexpectedly as it approached a curve, then shuddered violently as it passed over a rough patch of track. Passengers held on to their seats, some gasping in surprise. Elena's bundle slipped slightly from her lap, and Jack's hand shot out instinctively to steady it. "Got it," he said calmly, giving her a reassuring smile. Elena's pulse gradually slowed, though she could still feel the residual fear of the sudden jolt. She realized then that she had come to rely on Jack not just for appearances, but for safety. In the darkness of the night, surrounded by strangers, she felt vulnerable, yet protected, in a way that was both comforting and unusual. Hours passed, and the train rolled deeper into the night. Elena noticed small things about Jack she hadn't before. The way he adjusted his hat, the careful way he observed the other passengers, the quiet strength in his voice. She admired his ability to remain calm under pressure, to act decisively when needed, yet still give her space to breathe and remain herself. She felt a growing respect for him, one that went beyond gratitude. A quiet conversation developed between them as they settled into the rhythm of the journey. "Have you traveled long distances before?" Jack asked, his voice soft in the dim carriage light. "Yes," Elena replied. "I've traveled between villages and towns for as long as I can remember. It's not always easy, but it teaches you a lot about patience, courage, and trust. You learn to rely on yourself, and sometimes on others. I've done my share of traveling too, on the plains, on trails, with cattle and horses. You learn quickly who you can trust and who you cannot. It seems you've learned that too." Elena smiled faintly, feeling a connection growing between them.
"Yes."
"And sometimes it's hard. You have to make choices that aren't always easy, but you keep moving forward. That's what matters." The night continued, and the train slowed as it approached a small station. The passengers stirred, preparing to disembark. Elena and Jack remained seated, aware that the journey was far from over. Each mile brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to learn about one another. They shared quiet moments, observing the changing landscape, feeling the subtle shifts in tension, and finding comfort in the company of someone who understood, not just the need to pretend, but the deeper fears and hopes that lay beneath. As the train continued into the dark night, Elena felt a sense of cautious optimism. Despite the challenges, the whispers, and the judgment of strangers, she was no longer truly alone. Jack was beside her, steady and dependable, offering protection, guidance, and companionship. She realized that the journey was teaching her more than just travel. It was teaching her about trust, courage, and the unexpected strength of human connection. The night stretched on, and the stars appeared faintly through the carriage windows. The train moved forward, carrying its passengers toward their destinations. Elena leaned slightly against Jack, not out of pretense, but because it felt natural, a gesture of shared reliance in the quiet, uncertain night. And as the landscape passed by, she felt a growing sense of confidence that, with careful steps and a watchful companion, she could face whatever lay ahead. The challenges of the journey were far from over, but for now, in the steady rhythm of the train and the calm presence of Jack, Elena found peace. It was a fragile peace, delicate and precious, but it was enough to sustain her through the long hours of the night. She closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself to rest while keeping one hand lightly on her bundle, and felt the quiet promise of safety and friendship grow stronger with every passing mile. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting a soft golden glow across the countryside. Through the train's windows, rolling hills and distant forests were slowly illuminated, revealing the quiet beauty of the landscape. Inside the carriage, most passengers were still asleep or rubbing the sleep from their eyes, but Elena sat awake, staring out at the passing scenery. The night had been long, filled with small challenges, moments of fear, and the quiet companionship of Jack the cowboy, who had become more than just a helper. Elena felt a mix of relief and unease. The darkness of the night had hidden many dangers, but now the morning light revealed new realities. The train would soon stop at towns along the way, and each stop brought a new crowd of people, new eyes, and potential challenges. Her heart pounded at the thought. Traveling alone, even with a companion, meant constant vigilance, and she could not afford to let her guard down. Jack stirred beside her, stretching slightly as he glanced out the window. "Morning already," he said quietly, his voice low but steady. "We've been traveling for hours, and it feels like no time has passed at all." Elena turned her gaze to him, noticing the calm in his expression. "Yes," she replied softly. "Time feels strange on the train. The night was long, but now it feels like the journey is just beginning." Jack nodded thoughtfully. "It's the same with traveling across the plains. When you're on the trail, hours can stretch or shrink, depending on the work, the weather, or the company you keep." "I suppose it's similar on the train." Elena smiled faintly. "I've never traveled like this before, with someone else. Usually it's just me and the roads, and the fears, and the quiet." She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of her bundle. "Having someone with me, it makes the world feel a little less frightening." Jack glanced at her, his eyes softening. "I'm glad to be here. You don't have to face it alone." For a moment, they both sat in silence, letting the quiet of the carriage and the gentle motion of the train fill the space between them. But that quiet would not last. The train slowed as it approached the next small station, and the doors opened with a sharp clang. A few new passengers climbed aboard, their eyes scanning the carriage. Among them was a man with a suspicious look, someone who seemed eager to notice the young woman traveling alone. Elena's chest tightened. She could feel her anxiety rising, the old fear creeping back. Jack noticed immediately, shifting slightly to offer subtle protection. The man's gaze lingered on Elena, and she felt the weight of judgment pressing down. Her heart raced, and she wished she could simply disappear into the train's shadows.
"Stay calm," Jack whispered.
"Just keep to your role. I've got this."
She straightened her posture, lifted her chin, and let her eyes meet the man's briefly. There was no fear in her glance, only the quiet assurance of someone who would not be intimidated. Jack's presence beside her made it possible. The man muttered something under his breath and moved down the carriage, clearly realizing that Elena was not an easy target. Once the new passengers had settled, Elena felt her muscles relax slightly. She had faced judgment before, but each encounter was a test of courage and composure. Jack's calm strength had become a steadying force, something she had come to rely on more than she expected. She realized then that this journey was teaching her not just about survival, but also about trust and the value of quiet companionship. As the train moved on, Elena began to open up more to Jack. "I wanted to tell you something," she said, her voice low, almost hesitant, "about why this journey is important to me." Jack turned to face her fully, his eyes attentive. "Go on," he encouraged. Elena took a deep breath. "My family, they worry about me. I'm traveling to a relative's home for safety, yes, but also because there are expectations for me that I don't feel ready for. People assume I should stay in one place, marry someone they choose, live the life they planned. I've never wanted that. I want to make my own choices, even if it's difficult or dangerous." Jack nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her words. "I see," he said. "You're not just traveling for safety. You're traveling for freedom, for control over your own life." "Exactly. And traveling alone, it's the hardest part. People judge you, question you, try to control you. I hoped that if someone stood by me, even if only for appearances, I might make it safely to where I need to go." Jack was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "I admire your courage," he said finally. "It's not easy to take a stand for yourself in a world that doesn't always accept independence, especially for someone traveling alone. You faced the journey bravely, and you're still facing it now." Elena felt warmth in her chest at his words. His respect for her strength, his recognition of her struggles, it meant more than she could explain. She realized that while their relationship had started as a pretense, it was slowly becoming real in unexpected ways. Not romantic, not yet, but a connection built on trust, understanding, and shared purpose. The train rattled on, and the morning wore into midday. Passengers began to speak more, exchanging news of towns ahead, or commenting on the scenery. Elena noticed the subtle change in their attention. Some still whispered, but fewer seemed judgmental. The act of pretending, combined with Jack's quiet presence, had given her a measure of respect and space she had not experienced in other travels. But the peace was interrupted when the train jolted suddenly. A low rumble echoed through the carriages as the train slowed abruptly. Outside, a fallen tree partially blocked the tracks. The conductor moved quickly to assess the situation, and murmurs of concern spread among the passengers. Elena's heart raced. She had faced uncertainty before, but sudden danger always brought a sharper fear. Jack remained calm. "Stay close to me," he whispered. "We'll be fine." Elena nodded, gripping her bundle tightly as she followed his lead. Passengers shifted uneasily in their seats, and some whispered nervously about the delay. Jack's presence, however, brought a sense of stability. He moved quietly among the carriage, offering reassurances where needed and maintaining the illusion that they were a united, capable couple. Elena noticed the quiet authority in his movements, the way he seemed to naturally command attention without arrogance. As the train crew worked to clear the fallen tree, Elena found a moment to speak to Jack again. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything, for standing by me, for helping me." Jack glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "It's the right thing to do," he said simply.
And I respect your courage, too.
"You didn't have to ask me, yet you did, because you knew it mattered. That takes strength." Elena felt a mixture of relief and admiration. The journey was challenging, yes, but it was also revealing truths she hadn't expected. She was learning about herself, about her own strength, and about the unexpected kindness and reliability of others. Jack, though a stranger at the start, had become a steadfast companion in a way that surprised her. By midday, the tracks were cleared and the train resumed its journey. The sun was high, casting warm light through the windows. Elena and Jack settled back into their seats, letting the rhythm of the train carry them forward. Yet the challenges of the day had changed something between them. There was a quiet understanding, a shared experience that went beyond pretense. Each knew the other's strengths, fears, and intentions. Their partnership had grown real, even if the world outside still saw it as a simple act. Elena felt a sense of cautious optimism. The journey was far from over, and new challenges would undoubtedly arise. But with Jack by her side, she felt prepared to face them. She realized that this trip was about more than reaching a destination. It was about discovering resilience, trust, and the quiet power of human connection. As the train moved steadily into the afternoon, Elena allowed herself to relax more fully than she had in days. She leaned slightly back in her seat, feeling the gentle sway of the carriage, and looked at Jack with a small, grateful smile. The journey had been difficult, yes, but it was also teaching her that courage and companionship, even in unexpected forms, could make the impossible seem possible. And so, as the train rolled onward, carrying them toward unknown towns and untold experiences, Elena felt a quiet certainty growing inside her. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it with courage, with patience, and with the knowledge that she was not truly alone. The train slowed gradually as it approached the final station, its whistle echoing across the quiet countryside. The air outside was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Inside the carriage, passengers stirred, gathering their belongings and preparing to disembark. For Elena, The moment brought a mixture of relief, nervousness, and a subtle sadness. This journey, long and challenging, was coming to an end, and with it, the companionship she had come to rely on, even if it had begun as a pretense. Elena adjusted her scarf and smoothed her dress, glancing at the familiar bundle she had carried throughout the trip. Her hands lingered on it for a moment, as though drawing comfort from its weight. She felt the train slowing beneath her, every bump and shudder reminding her that the destination was near. She looked to Jack, who sat beside her with calm attentiveness, watching the passengers as they prepared to leave. The thought of parting from him brought a quiet ache she hadn't expected. Jack had started as a stranger, a cowboy she had barely spoken to before pleading for help, yet over the journey, he had become a steadfast companion. His quiet strength, calm presence, and subtle acts of protection had turned a simple act of pretense into something real. Trust, friendship, and mutual respect. "You've done well," Jack said softly. His voice carried the same calm assurance that had guided her through the challenges of the trip. "I know this journey hasn't been easy, but you handled it with courage." Elena looked at him, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted. "You made it easier, safer, better." She paused, searching for the right words. "Thank you, Jack. Truly." He gave a faint smile, tipping his hat slightly. "You don't need to thank me. It was the right thing to do. And I respect the way you faced everything along the way. That courage, it's not easy to find." A few moments passed as the train slowed further, its wheels creaking over the rails. Passengers gathered their things, some glancing at Elena and Jack with mild curiosity, others with a polite nod, and a few who whispered quietly as they passed. Elena felt the familiar tension of being observed, but now it was tempered by confidence. She had faced judgment and doubt before, and she had endured it with grace. As the train came to a complete stop, the conductor called out the destination. Passengers began filing off, stepping onto the platform with a mixture of hurry and relief. Elena followed Jack carefully, holding her bundle securely, as he guided her through the small crowd. The sun had risen higher now, casting warm light across the station and highlighting the small details of the town. The wooden benches, the flower boxes outside the station, the cobblestone street stretching beyond. Finally, they reached the edge of the platform. Elena's relative was waiting, a kind-faced woman who had promised her shelter and support. Elena felt a surge of relief. She had made it, and she was safe. But as she turned to face Jack, a new wave of emotion washed over her.
"This is it," she said softly. "This is where I leave the train. And you?"
Jack nodded, his expression calm but thoughtful.
"Yes," he said. "But remember,
Courage, patience, and trust got you here. You have everything you need to face what comes next." Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had expected to feel relief, perhaps even joy at the end of her journey, but she hadn't anticipated the bittersweet ache of parting from someone who had become so important to her.
I'll never forget this journey," she said.
Or you.
"You've shown me something important too, the strength that comes from facing challenges with honesty and courage. That's something rare." They stood in silence for a moment, letting the weight of their shared experiences sink in. The act of pretending to be husband and wife had created a bond neither had expected. It had been a partnership forged in necessity, trust, and quiet understanding. And though their paths would now diverge, the connection remained. Elena's relative stepped forward, offering her arm. "Come along, Elena," she said warmly. "You've had a long journey, and you need rest." Elena nodded, taking the offered arm, but she glanced back at Jack one last time. He stood with quiet dignity, tipping his hat once more. "Take care of yourself," he said simply. "And remember, courage and trust will guide you wherever you go." "I will," she whispered. With a final glance, she turned and walked toward her relative, stepping off the platform and into the small town that would be her temporary home. The streets were quiet, lined with simple wooden buildings and small gardens, a peaceful contrast to the tension of the journey. Each step she took felt lighter than the last, the burdens of fear and isolation slowly lifting. She was safe, and she was stronger than she had been at the start of the trip. Behind her, Jack mounted his horse, ready to continue his own journey across the plains and trails. He watched her for a moment, noting the way she walked with a new confidence, the subtle strength in her posture, the quiet determination in her eyes. He tipped his hat again, then turned his horse and rode toward the horizon, leaving the station and the town behind. Though their paths had separated, both Elena and Jack carried the memory of the journey with them. Elena had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to face it with determination. She had discovered that trust, even in a stranger, could transform fear into strength, and she had realized that companionship, however brief or unconventional, could offer more than protection. It could offer understanding, respect, and the quiet reassurance of shared humanity. As the day progressed, Elena settled into her relative's home, unpacking her belongings and reflecting on the journey. Each small object, the bundles she had carried, the keepsakes from her family, even the simple scarf around her neck, seemed to hold new meaning. They were reminders of the challenges she had faced, the obstacles she had overcome, and the unexpected friendships that had carried her through. In the quiet moments of the afternoon, Elena found herself thinking of Jack. She wondered where his travels would take him next, what adventures he might face on the trails and plains. She felt a deep respect for him, gratitude for his help, and an enduring sense of connection that words could not fully express. Though they had been strangers at the start, the journey had forged a bond that neither distance nor time could easily erase. Evening fell over the town, painting the sky with shades of pink, orange, and violet. Elena stepped outside for a moment, letting the warm glow of the sunset wash over her. She breathed deeply, feeling the cool air in her lungs, and allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The journey had been difficult, full of fear, judgment, and uncertainty, but it had also been full of courage, trust, and unexpected kindness. She had faced the world on her own terms, with strength she had not fully recognized until now. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Elena returned to the small house, feeling a sense of completion. She had arrived safely, not just in a physical sense, but emotionally as well. She had discovered her own resilience, the value of trust, and the quiet power of human connection. She had also learned that even in moments of fear and uncertainty, there could be moments of profound support and understanding, often from the most unexpected places. The journey had ended, but its lessons remained. Elena knew the challenges would come again, that life would present new obstacles and uncertainties, but she also knew that she was no longer the same person who had stood alone on that train platform hours ago. She had grown, learned, and faced the world with courage. And somewhere, far away across the plains, Jack continued his own journey, carrying with him the quiet knowledge of a partnership that had mattered, even if only for a brief, transformative moment. As she lay down that night, Elena felt a calmness she had not known in a long time. The journey had tested her, pushed her limits, and forced her to confront fears she had long avoided. But it had also brought her safety, trust, and understanding. And in that quiet moment, she smiled softly, knowing that no matter what the future held, she had proven to herself and to the world that she could face it with courage, resilience, and hope. The train, the journey, and the companionship that had started as a simple act of pretense had changed her forever. Elena knew that life would continue to test her, but now she was ready. She had faced fear, relied on trust, and found strength in unexpected places, and with that knowledge, she drifted into a peaceful sleep. The soft light of the stars casting a gentle glow over her and the small town that would now be her home.